Hi guys, I'm having an immensely difficult time shooting this video for some reason because I cannot get myself to stop rambling. I'm gonna do my best. So this is video 5, and today we're going to talk about Aristotle. No, Plato. See, I already messed up. I'm not starting the video over. Today we're talking about Plato. Last video I talked to you about Aristotle. Now Plato is actually, he predates Aristotle. This is from about 400 years before Christ. But this analogy is excellent for helping us understand what truth is. With Aristotle, we talked about the 4 levels of happiness, and I tried to help you establish that material things, beating other people out, those are not going to be true forms of happiness. They cannot last, they cannot sustain you. It's when we move into charitable works, doing for others, and the understanding of the transcendent, that there's something greater out there. Those are how you move into true and authentic happiness. So let me explain what Plato's cave is. We're going to go through it. In Plato's cave, in this analogy, which is a story meant to teach you a lesson, Plato talks about 3 prisoners. And all 3 prisoners, from the time that they were born, were facing a stone wall in a cave. Their heads were in a fixed position, so they couldn't turn and look behind them. They could only look straight ahead. Now, while these prisoners were in that fixed position where they could only look straight ahead, behind them, there was a bridge, and beyond that, there was a fire. So what happened was every time something walked across the bridge, that stone wall that the prisoners were facing would have shadows cast on it. So what happened over time was things would cross the bridge and the prisoners would begin to name the shadows. They thought the shadows were a real thing. So for example, a cat would walk across the bridge, and they would see the shadow and they would name the shadow thinking it was the actual thing. They had no idea it was simply a shadow being cast. They would look at the shadow of the cat and name it, like, oh, cat. Did they probably name it cat? Probably not. But for the sake of making this easier to understand, that's what we're gonna do. So then imagine that a person walks across, and maybe they are pulling a cart that has plants on it. And they see the shadow of the person, they see the shadow of the cart, they see the shadow of the plants, and they name those things and think, this is real. This is a real item. This is reality. Now, ultimately what happens in Plato's analogy is one of the prisoners breaks free and he runs out of the cave. Now, when he gets out of the cave and he opens his eyes, the sun is blinding. It actually hurts him to see things with fully open eyes because he's been in the dark his entire life. It hurts, okay? And this is something that we also realize is sometimes when we have an awakening of sorts, it is painful because we are seeing the world with new eyes. But continuing on, so the prisoner is outside, his eyes burn, and they finally begin to adjust. And then something he notices is the sun is shining on objects, and those objects are casting shadows. And he begins to realize, I thought that those shadows were the real thing, but they are simply an image being cast on the ground by the real object. So he sees a cat, he sees the shadow of the cat, and is realizing, oh my gosh, that is what is real. It's not the shadow is not the real thing, it's that cat. Anyway, he gets so excited, he has finally found truth. And he runs back to the prisoners he grew up with and begins to tell them what he saw. Now, not only do the prisoners not believe him, but the prisoners turn hostile against him and try to hurt him, try to kill him. So what is this story telling us? Ultimately, how I would like you to understand it is the world is going to tell you very specific things about your value. You are valuable by how much money you earn, by how many people, like you and want to follow you, by how much stuff you have. They're going to tell you that this is where your value comes from. What you look like, what your body type is, what kind of sports you play. This is what makes you valuable. But the truth is, it's not. Psychologists have studied the happiness of individuals across all sorts of income brackets. And what they ultimately determined was as long as people weren't destitute, like starving to death, their happiness did not hinge on their financial prosperity. So the people who are rich were no more happier than the people who are poor. It simply does not bring you true happiness. Now, at some point, I hope, if you're not already there, that you acknowledge my value does not come from what my hair looks like. It doesn't come from my physical physique. It does not come from the stuff that I have. If I have the newest iPhone, or if I have an off-brand Samsung or whatever the heck they are, it doesn't tell me the truth about myself. Those types of things do not matter to the core of who I am. When you begin to share these kind of things with other people, just like that prisoner, when you start to share them with your friends, like say, this really is not important, most likely the majority of them are not going to react positively. Okay? They might say things along the lines of like, oh, you're trying to say that a fancy car doesn't matter simply because you can't afford it and you're just trying to make yourself feel better. Or you're trying to make it seem like physical appearance doesn't matter because you're just jealous of other people. Those are probably some of the things you're going to hear. But in truth, you're right. The way people look, the things that they have, that does not define who you are. And it also doesn't define happiness. It does not define truth. Okay? Again, like I talked about in the last video, if you put all of your happiness on items or created things, you will ultimately never fully be happy. It is about moving on to that transcendence. Now, we are going to talk more about Adam and Eve and, the first and second creation story. We'll bring those up again. But when we talked about the first creation story and how people were made in the image and likeness of God, none of being made in the image and likeness of God had to do anything with what they looked like, their nationality, their hair color, their weight, their height, nor did it have anything to do with what Adam and Eve, well, in the first creation story, it's not Adam and Eve, but I'm going to call man and woman Adam and Eve for the sake of clarity. But it has nothing to do with what they own. That's not where their truth comes from. When they are said to be in the image and likeness of God, what that means is the fact that they exist, they are intentional, and they are wanted. For you, what that means is the very fact that you exist means that you are important, you are wanted, you are intentional. And that is something that a lot of times is extremely difficult for people to internalize, especially teenagers, which is heartbreaking to me. The fact that you exist means that you're important and you're wanted. Additionally, when we talk about being made in the image and likeness of God, that means that you have a different kind of awareness. You have an awareness of yourself in a way that other creatures do not. And you also, you have that connectedness to understand that there is something out there greater than you. And that is truth, and that is where your happiness is going to stem from. So just like with the prisoner when he broke out of the cave and the light of truth blinded him, sometimes it's painful. When you begin to grow as an individual and you begin to realize, okay, what I once thought were very important are not actually, that can be very disruptive to your life. That can be very disruptive to the way that you feel, and it can be extremely painful because it's almost like a portion of you has to die so that you can understand the greater truth. Now, hopefully you're able to apply this to yourself. And in your journal entries this week, I want you to apply Plato's Cave to you. Have you had any of these experiences with your life? Have you had confusion about what truth is? Because the word truth gets thrown around a tremendous amount, but have you had any confusion about what truth is? Have you tried to share truth with other people and not been accepted? Or have people become angry with you? You know, a lot of times when you begin to understand truth, it's also going to expose the unhealthy relationships that you have with others. So maybe that's something you can write about too. So hold on to this. Hold on to the levels of happiness from Aristotle. And these lessons are meant to kind of like walk with you as we complete the confirmation program. So I hope that you enjoyed this sort of brief Plato's Cave, and looking forward to next time. Bye.